All right, so today we're diving into a really significant and, let's be honest, often debated topic in Christian theology. What is the future role of the nation of Israel? We're going to be walking through the perspective laid out by theologian Michael Vlach, who makes a case for a distinct and, well, a yet-to-be-fulfilled purpose for Israel in God's plan. And, to set the stage, let's start with this really powerful, poetic declaration about the kingship of Christ. It just sets this grand scale, right? It identifies this king with titles that are racial, national, spiritual, and eternal. And it's that national title, King of Israel, that really brings us to the core of this whole explainer. And yeah, this brings us to the central puzzle. For centuries, theologians have wrestled with this very question. With the coming of Christ and the birth of the church, what happened to all those specific promises made to the nation of Israel? I mean, is its part in the story done, kind of superseded, or is there another act still to come? Okay, so to really get the weight of this, we first need to frame the debate itself. Because this isn't just some minor detail. It's a foundational issue, and it has some major implications. Now, our source makes the case that how you answer the question about Israel's future, well, it pretty much places you in one of several major theological camps. It's a key dividing line that separates different theological systems, like the ones that see God's promises to Israel as being fulfilled, symbolically in the church, from the view we're exploring today. So let's break down the two main positions. On one hand, you've got a view, often called supersessionism or replacement theology, which holds that the Christian church has basically fulfilled and replaced national Israel in God's plan. But on the other hand, there's the view our source argues for, which says, no, the nation of Israel still has a specific future salvation and a national restoration yet to come. So to build this case, the source actually takes us way back to the very beginning, to the Old Testament, to try and find the original purpose and the promises that were given to Israel. And this quote right here, it gets to a really core idea in the argument, that God's selection of Israel was never meant to be the final goal. Instead, Israel was chosen as a vehicle, a specific means to accomplish a much larger, universal end. And look how this logic plays out right from the Abrahamic covenant. God promises to make Abraham a great nation. That becomes Israel. But the ultimate goal, stated right there from the start, is that through this one specific nation, a blessing will flow out to all the families of the earth. The purpose was always both specific and universal. Then, the argument points to other Old Testament prophecies as more evidence. And what's really crucial here is that these promises of restoration were often given at the exact same time as warnings of judgment. So you have passages in Deuteronomy, Ezekiel, and Jeremiah that predict that even after being banished for disobedience, the nation would be physically gathered back to its land and spiritually renewed. All right, now we get to the real pivot point in this entire discussion, the coming of Jesus. How does his arrival change things? How does it impact all those Old Testament promises to national Israel? So this is the big question, right? This is the argument often made by those who believe the church has replaced Israel. They suggest that Jesus, as the fulfillment of everything, just absorbs and transcends the role of the nation. But our source material says, hang on, there's a different way to look at this. The argument really hinges on this key theological concept, corporate solidarity. Think of it like a head and a body. The head, that's Jesus, represents the entire body, the nation of Israel. He can act to save and restore the body, not by making it irrelevant, but by actually fulfilling its ultimate purpose. The one and the many are totally linked. And a prime example of this comes from Isaiah 49. In this passage, the servant, who's identified as Jesus, is given a two-part mission. First, to raise up the tribes of Jacob and to restore the preserved ones of Israel. And second, to be a light of the nations. So in this view, Jesus' role isn't to replace Israel, but to be the one who makes its restoration and the fulfillment of its original purpose even possible. Okay, so with that whole idea in our back pocket, the argument then jumps to the New Testament, looking for passages that seem to affirm this idea of a continued, distinct future for the nation of Israel. So you've got Jesus himself promising his 12 apostles that in the future, regeneration, they will sit on 12 thrones. And who are they going to be judging? Not some symbolic idea. The text is very specific. The 12 tribes of Israel, a direct reference to a restored national structure. Then you get this absolutely crucial moment right before Jesus ascends to heaven. The apostles ask him, "Lord, at this time, are you restoring the kingdom to Israel?" Now, pay close attention to Jesus' response. He doesn't correct their assumption. He doesn't say, "You guys are way off base, that's not the plan." No, he corrects their preoccupation with timing. He says, "It is not for you to know times or periods." The implication here is that their hope for restoration was right, it just wasn't on their schedule. And then, of course, you have this bombshell verse from the Apostle Paul in Romans, which is really a cornerstone of the whole argument. It's an explicit declaration that all Israel will be saved. And it directly links this future event back to the promises of the Old Testament prophets. Next up, the book of Revelation gives us another piece of the puzzle, and it centers on this very specific number. So what does it represent? Well, this number is explained in Revelation chapter 7, which describes two distinct groups, right back to back. First, you have the 144,000, and they are identified specifically as being sealed from every tribe of the sons of Israel. Then, immediately after, John sees a vast multitude that nobody could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language. From this viewpoint, that deliberate contrast shows that even in the end times, a distinction is kept between ethnic Israel and believers from all the other nations. So let's zoom out for a second and see how this all fits together. The argument is that God's plan is actually big enough to hold both unity and diversity in perfect harmony. The argument really boils down to this principle. Spiritual unity in Christ doesn't erase diversity. Our source compares it to gender. Men and women are equal in Christ, yet they can still have different roles. In the same way, this view holds that the deep spiritual unity of all believers doesn't just cancel out God's specific ongoing plans for the nations, and that includes the nation of Israel. And, this quote from the respected scholar C.E.B. Cranfield just powerfully drives the point home. He argues that the book of Romans, specifically chapters 9 through 11, stands as an emphatic, undeniable rebuttal to the idea that the church has simply and permanently taken Israel's place in God's plan. So we're left with this final, broader question, aren't we? The theological case we've just walked through argues that God's ultimate plan embraces both unity and diversity without erasing distinct identities. What might that suggest for us? It kind of challenges us to think about how our own unique, personal, cultural, and even national identities can coexist and contribute within a larger, unified community. It's a question with echoes far beyond just theology. Thanks for joining us on The Explainer.